There we go. Zoom has told us that the recording is in progress, and I am going to hand over to our resident UCAT expert who will be leading us through the opening section of this webinar. So over to you, Hamza.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hamza, and I am now a final year medical student at the University of Glasgow. I did the UCAT in 2019, and I scored 3,150 in the kind of back in the old day when there was also abstract reasoning as part of that. And I'm here to take you through over the next kind of 4 sessions, kind of take you through the different sections of the UCAT and kind of have a bit of a chat about what the UCAT is, for people who haven't had much experience with kind of doing any of the questions before, kind of pitching this to people, you guys who might not have previously had any UCAT understanding. And we're going to try and have a conversation and we're going to try and demystify some of the aspects of the UCAT for you over the next 4 hours. So today we're just going to talk about, what the UCAT is, why it's important, kind of why do medical students use it, what are the different parts that you're going to be assessed on, how do they work together to kind of, why are they useful for medical students to kind of assess you on, and then what are the important dates for you to put into your calendar and think about, kind of getting things ready and getting your admin ready to sit the exam kind of over the course of this summer. Next slide. So the UCAT or University Clinical Aptitude Test is one of the most integral parts of your medical school application process. So it's a computer-based admissions test for medical schools in the UK, but also medical schools out with the UK. Medical schools in Australia and Canada also use the UCAT as part of their application process, and dental schools across the UK are also using the UCAT as part of their admissions process. And the aim of the UCAT is to assess basically a range of softer skills like mental abilities and behavioral attributes that universities don't really assess through your academic kind of profile. So your GCSEs and your A levels and your personal statement and your work experience and your interviews. But they want to assess and they want to differentiate between candidates who are all doing very well at school, and they want to assess your abilities in certain attributes and skills that are kind of identified as quite important for healthcare professionals. And so universities are going to use this as part of the broader application kind of process. They're going to use it alongside your A levels and your GCSEs. And again, they use it to help select applicants for interviews and to differentiate between candidates with similar academic achievements. Next slide. So again, kind of very similarly, why is the UCAT kind of quite important? So why is it so important to medical schools? So it's a standardized test. I mean, it's one that every person is kind of on a level playing field, relatively speaking, for. And it takes into account skills that really aren't kind of assessed through your A levels. And therefore, it's quite a good way for universities to differentiate between candidates who all do very well at school, and have similar scores at school and have similar kind of profiles when they're making their applications to medical schools. Other specific sections in the UCAT allow assessment of specific things, and one of the areas, the situational judgment test, that will help universities kind of determine whether you have some of those soft kind of professionalism and ethical understanding. Not to a very advanced level. Again, you've still got 5 years of medical school that will teach you most of those things, but again, will help you kind of see if you have some of those soft skills that can help make you more successful in a career in medicine. So the key kind of big changes, so the UCAT has undergone a huge kind of transformation over the last year. Um, so last year there used to be 4 major sections or 4 cognitive subtests. So they used to be verbal reasoning, decision making, quantitative reasoning, but they also used to be a section called abstract reasoning, which you might still see in some of the older resources that you might be using. And that section, that final section, abstract reasoning, which was the section that was assessing kind of shapes and pattern recognition in shapes, has kind of been removed. And that means that the timing, so the test is still 2 hours long, but what's happened is the timing has been adjusted. So we've got a little bit of extra time for some of the earlier sections. So 1.5 minutes for verbal reasoning, decision making in the SJT have been added on, and 2 minutes for quantitative reasoning. Again, that gives you a little bit extra time to work with, but it still means that the UCAT is a tough exam in terms of time management, and that's still the kind of aspect of kind of the UCAT preparation that most people tend to find is kind of managing some of the time. And I saw a message in the chat go out just asking about kind of time constraints in the UCAT, and I think would love to hear your thoughts on that. Have people found that?
Yeah, it's one thing that I've noticed when speaking to a lot of students that the time is the pressured bit because it just
Yeah,
snowballs and then you quickly lose momentum very quickly.
yeah. Someone said tough but manageable. I think that's kind of the kind of skills that you kind of develop through your practice kind of makes that a little bit more manageable. Um, the biggest challenge I think I've noticed with students who kind of I teach is often there's circumstances where even if you go over on one question, you might not think you've done quite a lot. You might be like, oh, I've only spent 3 minutes on one question, but that kind of just kills the momentum. That means that when you're going into your other questions, it's difficult to get back into the mindset where you're doing kind of the 30, 40-second questions, even if those are possible to do. And so that can be one of the biggest challenges for it. Um, but yeah, it's good that the timing's been extended as well, and it does give you a little bit of extra time. So the UCAT is split into 4 different sections, and we'll talk about each of these sections kind of individually. We'll go into a lot of detail about them over the next couple of sessions, in weeks kind of coming, but we'll also talk about these sections individually later on. So verbal reasoning kind of assesses your ability to critically evaluate information presented in written passages. Decision making evaluates your ability to make sound decisions and judgments using complex information. And again, decision making is mainly about your logical reasoning and kind of putting things together in a way that is kind of logical and creating and being able to creatively problem solve, which is a skill that's essential for doctors to have. And then quantitative reasoning assesses your ability to use numerical skills to solve problems and interpret data. So again, it's kind of adapting data. Again, all of these sections will provide you with some sort of data input, either in the form of a written text or in the form of a table or in the form of a graph. And they're assessing your ability. All three of the cognitive subtests essentially are assessing your ability to use that data and to create something new or to use it to calculate a new figure or a new value. The SJT, that final section, measures your ability to understand real world medical scenarios and situations, and kind of interpret those in a way that allows you to make ethical judgments about kind of the scenarios that you are presented with. Next slide. So, kind of some general tips and tricks. Start revising as early as you can. The more practice you kind of get with the UCAT, the better that you are going to feel when you're on test day. The more understanding you have about the different variety of questions, the more understanding that you have about your own strengths and weaknesses. Because the biggest thing in the UCAT is understanding how you feel about different styles of questions. Because some people will find some questions a lot easier, some people will find other questions much more difficult. And so you need to decide which questions for you think you'll be able to do quickly on exam day, which questions you think you'll take a little bit longer on exam day, and maybe then you'll flag for review and come back to on your second run throughs. And kind of similarly, practicing under timed conditions helps you get that kind of practice of the pressure that you might experience kind of with some of these questions. And as people are saying that timing is quite the difficult game to play in the UCAT. And if you don't give yourself that time pressure, it can be quite easier. It can be a lot easier to do the questions. and therefore adding the time pressure on can add that degree of challenge, which makes that more realistic to test day. And kind of linking onto that, using the computer for revision as much as possible kind of helps you get that realism down even more. I know there are people who use books and kind of other more physical kind of information for the UCAT, but really most of the all of the questions you'll do will be on the computer. So getting familiar with the UCAT calculator, which can be really fiddly, getting familiar with the UCAT kind of systems and the UCAT kind of interface, which can sometimes be quite slow and quite kind of laggy, and it's quite old kind of interface to even get familiar with. And so getting an understanding of that can be quite a good thing to do so that you're prepared and you have an understanding on test day of exactly what you to expect. And then kind of more on test day itself, letting the adrenaline guide you. I remember being very stressed on my test day. It was quite a stressful kind of occasion. It's nothing like you've ever done before. And letting your adrenaline kind of guide you through that is quite a good way of practicing that. And then don't just practice the section you find easiest, practice the sections you find most difficult. That will help you improve your score, but it'll also kind of help you get more practiced and more familiar with um, the questions that you're going to find quite tough on exam day. And it helps you kind of prepare for flagging questions and able to do those questions in the time pressure kind of will give you the most kind of overall benefit.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Hamza. We will hear more from him later, but a fantastic start. Now, I'm just gonna welcome those of you who arrived a little bit late. Hello, good evening. I hope you're finding this enjoyable and worthwhile. Before I sort of talk in a little bit more detail about how Medic Mind could potentially support you on your sort of UCAT preparation journey, let's just gauge the atmosphere in the Zoom chat as to how the preparation is going. Who started? Who is at the beginning? Who perhaps is a little further through their preparation? How have you found it? I'll just give you sort of 5 to 10 seconds to reflect upon your thoughts and let us know in the chat. Again, who's going to be that first answer? Oh, Ross at the very beginning, though I had to sit the UCAT next year. About to start. Fantastic. Fantastic. So you've come at a good time to this webinar, I think, if you're right at the beginning. Revising daily, that's good to see. I think little and often is the sort of the key takeaway from my perspective. About a month in, been revising since mock, so about 2 weeks yet to start. UCAT is next year. Well, you're even more prepared. You're, the early bird. Um, Now, how can Medic Mind support you in your mission to ace the UCAT? Well, at Medic Mind, we offer personalized one-to-one online tuition, which offers flexibility, but it's also tailored to your learning style and specific requirements. So for the UCAT, one of our specialist tutors, such as Hamza, will guide you through each section, focusing on the how and the why. So it's not a case of just completing thousands of questions. Our tutors help you unpick the sort of strategy and meaning behind each question. So that will improve both your accuracy and your time efficiency. So our UCAT online course, which is our sort of asynchronous product offering, it gives you everything you need to prepare at your own pace. So you'll get expert video tutorials, question banks to work through, full mock exams, and a sort of smart performance tracking dashboard, which will hone in on those strengths and weaknesses, which you can use accordingly. Our UCAT live days are intensive tutor-led sessions delivered either online or in person. Here you'll learn powerful strategies, practice live with guidance, and get those questions answered in real time. So it's perfect for focused, high impact preparation. So we're hosting these from Saturday onwards throughout the whole of the UCAT preparation period for this cycle. Our full application packages, they will guide you through every step of the application process, from the UCAT to the personal statement to mock interviews and the medical school selection. So it's very one-to-one. It's tailored support designed to maximize your chances of getting into medical school. And finally, our medicine work experience programs will give you a real insight into the world of a doctor. So you'll take part in clinical scenarios, ethical discussions, and reflective writing, all while building evidence for your personal statement and interviews later down the line. So this summer, we are hosting a series of work experience programs in medicine, but also in other careers that will provide immersive, real-world career simulations and networking opportunities, as well as admissions guidance and UCAS tutoring. So really, really relevant to everybody on the webinar today. So I'll just show you a few highlights from past programs just to give you a little bit of a flavor. There we go. Some sort of first aid going on there. There we go. A few more highlights. And before I hand back to Hamza, we will be sharing the recording of this webinar as well. So if there's anything that you feel that you missed out on first time around, you can review the footage and make a note accordingly. So I'll pass over back to Hamza now, who is going to guide you through the sections of the UCAT in a little bit more detail.
Just before you do that, I
Yeah.
think there's a question in the chat that was for
Ah,
you.
where are the UCAT live days based? Thank you very much, Hamza. So they are predominantly in London, but we do host them in Birmingham and also in Manchester as well. As I said, they are a combination of online for those geographically constrained, but we also do have the in-person ones as well. So hopefully that answers the question. Thank you very much. Over to you, Hamza.
Perfect. Right. So just for the next bit, I'm just going to talk you through the four sections kind of the UCAT exam, kind of what each section is kind of assessing, and we'll give you some tips, some very general tips at the moment, just to talk you through kind of what things you can do to help aid your practice initially, especially. So when you go into the exam hall, you're gonna kind of just give you, I'm gonna try and give you a flavor of what test day kind of feels like. So you're gonna go into the exam hall. You're going to kind of be quite nervous. It's very similar to a driving theory test. So you have to hand in your ID, and you have to kind of hand in your form, and you put all of your belongings in a locker. You're only allowed to take a bottle of water with you into the exam hall. No devices, no wallet, no keys. Everything is put into a locker. You're taken in to the exam hall. Someone will check you. Normally, they'll check to make sure that you've got nothing in. And then you'll sit down at the um, at a computer. You'll be given some headphones and you'll be given a whiteboard. One thing I would recommend doing at the beginning is always ask for more whiteboards. It's often, especially when we get into the later sections, kind of decision making and quantitative, it's always more handy to have more whiteboards than you think you'll need because in terms of taking notes and writing things down, you do not want to be stopping in the middle of the test, put your hand up and asking for more whiteboards if you run out of space. So always ask for a couple more. And then you'll sit down and there'll be instructions that run through, and then you'll come into verbal reasoning. And so verbal reasoning will be the first section kind of the UCAT. And you'll have 44 questions in 22 minutes, roughly 11 scenarios. So 2 minutes per scenario or 30 seconds per question. You may have more scenarios than that. Some of the kind of scenarios will have less questions to them. But the purpose of the VR section is to test your ability to infer information from longer written text and to assess your data interpretation through the medium of written information. And you've got a lot of different question types. So true, false, can't tell, statement questions, author's opinion questions, word and comprehension questions, and mathematical questions, where you'll have to do very short calculations based on information in the text. Again, those mathematical questions won't be particularly complex. It's again still more about interpreting the information from the written text and being able to find the information, but you might be expected to do a short mathematical equation around them. So in general, for verbal reasoning, making sure you think critically about the text and making sure that you're not making assumptions. So only answers that can be directly inferred from the main text, kind of picking those answers are a good way of kind of baseline approaching verbal reasoning questions. Now, when you're practicing, especially now, a good tip is to practice speed reading. So there are lots and lots of different ways to practice your speed reading skill. But one way you could do this is to get some sort of newspaper article, and then give yourselves 30 to 40 seconds to try and read and interpret as much information as you can. Then give that article to someone else, and ask them to ask you questions based on the article that they read. So it'll be the same article, they'll read it and they'll ask you questions on it. And then you can see how much you've retained in after doing a reading about 30 to 40 seconds. Over time, you'll slowly see that skill improve. Initially, you might not have picked out as much information, but over time, you will pick out more and more information. The biggest killer of the UCAT is time, and I will continue to say that over the next couple of weeks that you'll see me. If a question is taking you longer than 30 to 40 seconds per question, always be willing to move on and come back. So flag the question, put an answer down and come back. Don't Questions in the UCAT can often be time sieves in the sense that the more time you put in, they'll just keep taking more and more time. Um, and so if you're ever spending 2 to 3 minutes on a question, you know that that pushes you out for other questions later on. So don't take more than 30 to 40 seconds per question. Be willing to flag it, move on, and come back. So, and then you'll move on to decision making. So between sections, you'll have 1.5 minutes to read and interpret the information, kind of instructions. Use that time. Another big piece of advice, another big tip is to use that time to just kind of decompress, de-stress a little bit between sections. Don't kind of rush into the next section. A lot of students do tend to do that. And I think what it does is it means that you're panicking by the end. And especially when you get to that final section, you'll have built up so much stress, that it's often easier to make mistakes that you might not be planning to make. So decision making, I would say between sections, just take a bit of time and have a bit of a decompress. So decision making is the second section in the UCAT, 35 questions in 37 minutes. It's a bit less time pressured comparative to the other sections, roughly about a minute per question. But again, it's got a very similar purpose to verbal reasoning in the sense that it's all about logically appraising data and coming to logical conclusions. It's designed to see if you're able to think in structure and you're able to analyze critically information. So it's all about critical analysis of data that you've been provided. Again, a very significant variety in question type, but actually a lot of these questions, although there is a variation in how they're expressed, what they're testing is very similar. So the logical puzzles, the Venn diagrams, the probability, even the syllogisms can be approached using a Venn diagram approach, interpreting information and strongest argument question. They're all testing your ability to logically appraise data that you are provided. So again, and I'll talk about this more on the next slide, everything that you are assessed in decision making, the goal is to create something. And this is why the whiteboard is really important. So if we can go to the next slide. Using the whiteboard here, this is your biggest kind of time to use it. It's the section in which drawing diagrams and creating kind of images or pictures or Venn diagrams or tables, creating your own versions of the data and finding ways to condense the data in a way that's easy for you to interpret can be a really good way for the answer to just pop out at you. especially in stuff like the logical puzzles, because the notepad can be a great way of understanding what the question is trying to ask, as well as kind of creating a way for the questions to kind of pop out at you. Don't make any assumptions. It's the same as verbal reasoning here, in the sense that unless it can be directly reasoned from the statement, then it's probably not true, or cannot be assumed to be true. So again, very similarly to verbal reasoning, inferences are allowed, but assumptions can be kind of a bit of a dangerous game to play. Taking your time. So here, again, as we've identified, decision making is a lot less time pressured than the other sections of the UCAT. So making sure you're able to focus in on the information. Decision making is the most likely to have things that are designed to not to trip you up, but questions and parts of the question that are designed to kind of throw you off a little bit. And so it's often easy to make kind of assumptions or silly mistakes in decision making, where you kind of draw a conclusion that, there might be other data that you've missed that might not be able to give you the same conclusion. So making sure you read everything a few times. From time to time, they are going to throw in some double negatives. So making sure that you're thinking very carefully about exactly what they're saying and exactly the reasoning behind the conclusion you're drawing can really help you kind of determine your answer. And then you move on to quantitative reasoning. So quantitative reasoning is the third section of the UCAT, as the final section to be scored from 300 to 900. So nowadays, your UCAT score kind of jumps between 900 and 2,700. That's the range of scores that you'll have now. Before, it used to be between 1,200 and 3,600. But because of the removal of abstract reasoning, quantitative is the last section to be scored from 300 to 900. It's made up of 36 questions in 26 minutes, roughly 45 seconds per question. QR is basically designed to test your ability to logically interpret mathematical data and perform basic mathematical calculations. I'll talk about this again more. You do have access to a calculator, but it's designed intentionally to be quite tough and cumbersome to use. There is a general preference for mental arithmetic to be used if possible there. So practicing your mental maths is a good technique point to get used to kind of being able to do that quick mathematics and finding shortcuts in maths, especially in things like counting to certain numbers, counting to 20, counting to 30, counting to 40. If you're able to kind of speed that up, you're able to interpret the data a lot more quickly. Maths content will be maximum to a GCSE maths standard. So don't worry if you're not taking A-level maths, you should still be able to access most of the questions in the quantitative reasoning section. Big tips, kind of for the QR section, only using the calculator when necessary. So the calculator takes a long time to type and use. So for simple mathematical processes, you shouldn't need to use the calculator, or you should try and avoid using the calculator. The big issue a lot of students do tend to face from my years of teaching the UCAT, especially in quantitative reasoning, is the need for perfectionism. So people will often kind of choose to use the calculator to check answers or just to double check they're getting it right. I wouldn't waste time on that. You don't have the time to inherently go back and double check and triple check your answers, especially using a calculator that has so much room for error. And so trying to avoid using that as much as possible, or trying to avoid double checking, because you can often get into, and what point 3 is trying to say, is you can often get into a cycle of rationalizing your answer, where you look at each answer option and you find the mathematics. Remember, every answer option is going to follow a mathematical process that probably comes from the data that you're given. There might be a couple of them that are obviously wrong, but most of your mathematical answer options are different versions of the mathematical process that you're going to want to do. And so if you kind of get beholden to perfectionism, you can often be stuck in a cycle where you rationalize every answer to be potentially true. And therefore, picking your answer at the end can help you avoid that process, because what it can help you do is it can help you make sure you're only doing the mathematical process you know is correct that will help you get to the correct answer. And again, as is the case for every section, but especially quantitative, especially VR, using the flag and review function to ensure you don't miss out. The UCAT isn't like your A-level papers in the sense that your questions aren't staggered in difficulty. So in A-levels, I also tutor A-levels, and I know that A-level papers, your harder questions are at the back of the paper, and your easier questions are theoretically at the front of the paper. But in the UCAT, it's not that. So in the UCAT, the difficult and easy questions are intermixed or interspersed. So if you're going to kind of waste time on a particularly hard question in the middle, you might be then giving yourself a risk. You might be risking missing out on some easy marks at the back. And therefore making sure you're using the flag and review to making sure that you're at least seeing every question during all of your practice set, and then especially on the exam day, making sure you're really seeing all of the questions using the flag and review will help you kind of narrow down your answer options. And then the SJT is the final section of the UCAT. It's scored slightly differently. It's scored from band 1 to band 4, except in Australia. So if there's any Australian medical student applications in this kind of talk, in Australia, it's scored still from 300 to 900. But in the UK, it's scored from band 1 to 4, where band 1 is kind of the highest score, band 4 being the lowest score. And the questions are based around ethical scenarios. Roughly 88 seconds per scenario, because it's 4 questions to a scenario. And it's kind of designed to test your ability to make rational ethical decisions in line with GMC and GDC professionalism standards. There are 2 types of questions: appropriateness questions, where you have to determine whether a response to a ethical issue is an appropriate response to do, or idealness scenarios, or idealness questions, where you have to determine whether a factor is important to take into account in whether when you make a decision. So one of the scenarios is about, one of the types of questions is about whether the outcome is an appropriate outcome. One of the scenarios is whether a factor is important in making your judgment call. Does that make sense? Cool. And then final section. So this is the one section in the UCAT in which kind of making sure you have some external knowledge or do some reading beforehand. And I would recommend reading the GMC Good Medical Practice Guide. The GDC also has a Good Dental Practice Guide. They're both very similar. And I think just reading the GMC Good Medical Practice Guide, so understanding the basic requirements of professionalism in the workplace and duties of a doctor, will help you get some further understanding kind of what you would be expected to do in a situation. And then the final thing is, this is the last section in the exam. So remember to maintain as much focus as you can in order to get the best possible score. Often, remember, you're going to get to this point. You're going to be an hour and a half in. There's going to be a lot of fatigue kicking in at this point. The UCAT is a marathon, not a sprint. Staying as focused as you possibly can through the exam and kind of getting to that final section still fresh. And this is why I recommend taking that 1.5 minutes fully between sections, because it allows you to have a little bit of downtime just to reset your brain a little bit, kind of have a bit more of a relaxed mindset going into that final section. Remember to maintain focus to get the best possible score. Perfect. And finally, some key dates. So just kind of some key dates that I think would be important for you guys to have in your calendar. So the 17th of June is when test booking opened, so a week ago. But the first test is on the 7th of July. Final test booking deadline is the 19th, but the last test dates are on the 26th of September. And the 15th of October is the UCAS deadline, which I'm sure you all know. Results are automatically sent to universities. You do not have to add your result to your UCAS application yourselves. They are sent automatically from the uni. The other thing I would recommend is when you're booking your tests now, consider your other commitments. I had friends in my year when I did my application who struggled with maintaining kind of the momentum of UCAT prep, especially when they were coming back into school in early September. If you guys are coming back into school, I remember we had September marks. Not every school does, but some schools may have September marks. And it often kind of balancing UCAT prep with prepping for your September marks, trying to get back into the flow of A2 preparations, which can be quite challenging as well. Consider your wider schedule and book your UCAT at a time where you have as least kind of things going on as possible to allow you as much time to focus on UCAT prep. Perfect. And I think the next slide is just kind of key takeaways. So we've talked about what the UCAT is, why it's important, what are the different sections, and what are the important dates. And I've given you some general advice on things we would do for every section and kind of some key tips. Over the next couple of sessions, we'll talk about all of those individual sections in more detail, and we'll give you some more advice kind of on how to approach questions and what to consider for each questions. And we'll also kind of have some practice in lesson to go through those things.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Hamza. I'll give you a moment just to decompress quickly before we launch into the Q&A. I can't give you a minute and a half, I'm afraid, but
No
take
worries.
now before we sort of open up um, questions to the wider floor, we did have one that was entered into the chat before you started from Grigorios, who asked, a bit unrelated, but is the UCAT admission score higher for international students compared to home students, i.e. British natives?
So in general, from my experience of doing university consultations, it is it's purely because international students, as the law kind of states in the UK, there's only a certain number of medical places that can be given to international students, and every university has a different quota of medical places that they can give to international students. It's about 10% of a cohort, so no matter however many medical students there are in a year group, only 10% of those can be maximally international, and therefore the competition ratios in those cohorts tend to be higher in the sense that there tends to be more people applying for every one place. And so the UCAT cutoffs do tend to be slightly higher. You can, my best piece of advice for that is every university pretty much every year gets a huge amount of Freedom of Information Act requests to look at their exact UCAT cutoffs or minimum UCAT scores. And I would recommend just if you Google the universities you're thinking of applying, put UCAT score FOI at the end of it. You can find out the UCAT cutoffs or the minimum UCAT scores for the preceding years. Unfortunately, it won't be able to tell you what it will be for that year because you don't know what the competition ratios are going to be looking like. But in general, yes, they are slightly higher.
Fantastic. Awesome answer. Now, a question from Ross. What websites are good for learning question types, particularly Venn diagrams?
So MedicMind's got a lot of resources kind of on the different types of Venn diagram question. There's a lot of different variety on Venn diagrams. There's a lot of different resources kind of just freely available online. Past Medicine has some questions. MedicMind has a huge amount of questions kind of on the different types of questions that you can get. And the official UCAT question bank is also kind of comes highly recommended. Those questions are very realistic to the ones that you're sitting because they're overflow questions from the actual test. So they're questions that haven't been selected. But often they can be slightly more difficult than the real exam because those are questions that have been decided to be rejected. But yeah, I would say try and look for question banks with a wide variety or a wide number of questions because they're probably going to cover the most variety of questions. Just by having a sheer number of them, you end up covering the most variety of different question types that you can get kind of for Venn diagrams.
Absolutely. There you go, Ross. Hope that's answered your question. Next question, I think, is sort of touching upon timing, really. This student is asking whether it's effective to start UCAT preparation now if they're sitting it next summer, but they'll be away for 3 weeks during the summer.
So you're setting it, if I'm not mistaken, in summer 2026.
I
Would that be
think so.
correct?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so.
I think there's obviously no early time to get familiar with the questions. I think obviously right now you're kind of on your presumably holiday after your GCSEs. That would be kind of where most people would be.
Yeah.
So remember to enjoy that because you don't get a lot of long holidays kind of through your career. But taking a look at some of the questions won't do you any harm. Um, and then I think just naturally when you go back to school in September and start your AS levels, that takes up a lot of time and is quite high pressure in itself. And so that will then probably mean you're not able to do as much prep. Um, if you know you're gonna be away for 3 weeks, my better bet is to kind of schedule your most of your UCAT prep to slightly earlier. So start in June, maybe in building up more intensity to your UCAT prep. Because then that means you can negate for the 3 weeks that you'll kind of be away for. And then maybe taking less pressure, but if you're going away and you will still have access to doing questions, you can still do them on your phone. So even if you are able to do a short section every day, you might not be doing full mocks while you're away, and that's completely fair enough. But doing short sections, you might then be able to still maintain kind of that momentum going towards your test day. So overall, I think there's no harm in looking at the questions now, but enjoy your summer because don't get a lot of them. And I would say earlier prep starting earlier next year would probably be a much better kind of bet for you.
Fantastic. Yeah, enjoy the summer. Um, if you take nothing else away, take that away. This next question is related to the situational judgment section. And this question is about what tips would you have for not overthinking those questions?
I think I think that can be quite difficult. I think generally what I would say is when I look at an SJT question now, I think the best advice I've ever been given about them was to basically identify first of all who your player is, because you need to identify who the person in the scenario is and what their role is, and then what the ethical situation does. And I think it's more important. A lot of people tend to over escalate quite quickly, and I think that can be something that maybe it comes under overthinking it. But understanding what the role of the person at play is. If they're a medical student, then maybe escalating would be appropriate. But if they're a consultant, then escalating that would be a little bit more challenging. There aren't as many people to escalate to at that point. Um, I would say form baseline rules of things that you would always consider very important or very appropriate things to do. So anything that affects patient safety is always very important to consider, or is a very appropriate a response that kind of benefits that would be a very appropriate response. And then consider kind of those other some of the questions fall under an ethical gray area, and then what you do is you just determine whether they're an appropriate thing to do or an inappropriate thing to do. And then determining between the two, appropriate but not ideal, inappropriate but not awful, that can be that will always be more challenging to do. But kind of basically there go with gut instinct. But the most important thing is determining whether you're going appropriate or inappropriate. And that can be a lot easier to do. And then kind of the nuance can be a bit more challenging.
There we go. Thank you very much, Hamza. This next question is all about you and your preparation when you were in the position that the students are in now, preparing for the UCAT. What was your score? How did you prepare, and what did a day in the life of Hamza look like?
So I got 3,150, which works out to 787 per section on average, which at the time was a top 1% score. But 2019 was very different, kind of it was a different test. And how did I prepare? So I took kind of an online course at the beginning. Just a short day course at the beginning of my prep cycle. And then I focused in on practice questions as much as I could. And I think practice makes perfect with the UCAT. And I got an understanding of um, what the UCAT kind of what all of the different question styles looked like. I got an understanding of kind of how I worked under the time pressure. And I basically went into the test kind of going, I don't want to be left out of kind of anything. And I think I started about now actually probably maybe a little bit later than now. I probably started maybe pretty much about now. Um, so late June, because I think my mocks finished early June. I had a couple of weeks where I just took a bit of a de-stress before I started, and I must have started late June, and I sat my exam in early August. So I think I gave myself 9 weeks of prep. The first maybe 4 weeks until my summer holidays, I was doing two mocks a week. So a mock on a Saturday and a mock on a Sunday. And again, I focused in as quickly as I could on full mocks. And then during the week, I would do maybe 20 to 30 minutes of practice questions, all timed, because I recognized very early on the UCAT is not that difficult if you, or not as difficult if you're doing it untimed. It's much more challenging with the time pressure. And then once my summer holiday started, it was basically a mock a day. And I was tracking my scores on an Excel spreadsheet to kind of see whether I was trending upwards, trending downwards. And then that would allow me to then focus. So basically, I was only doing about 3 hours of UCAT prep per day, but two of those were kind of doing the marks, reflecting on the marks. That took about 2.5 hours. And then half an hour would be on focused timed practice on the section I struggled with the most that day. So if it was verbal reasoning that day, I would spend a bit more time doing verbal reasoning, but very short amount of time. So I wouldn't have overdone it. And again,
Yeah.
that helped prevent a bit of burnout as well. But it still meant that I was enjoying my summer while doing the UCAT.
Yeah, so
Yeah,
absolutely. Timing, both in the UCAT and the preparation, is very important.
yeah.
I think this next question ties into, I suppose, the tracking that you mentioned. So do you have any tips for what to do when your scores sort of plateau or regress significantly?
First, recognize that it's completely normal for scores to plateau at certain points and regress even. And day by day fluctuation in the UCAT is really normal. I think it's important not to panic because you can often create a self-fulfilling prophecy by seeing one score regress, thinking, oh, that just means I'm now really bad at decision making, for example, and then going into your next decision making the next day you do it with a mindset where you're going, oh well, I'm already kind of now bad at decision making, I'm already struggling with decision making, so I might as well the focus goes, your technique goes, you doubt yourself, you doubt your own ability a bit, and then the game plan that you go into the game with, you kind of you vary from that quite significantly. So basically, my big thing is when your scores plateau or regress, hold the fort. Recognize that that's completely normal. Everyone has up dips and curves in the process. Recognize that your technique is probably fine. If your scores were high enough to get a good score earlier, then your technique's okay. And then focus in on kind of just holding that and you'll notice your score comes back. Because again, it is completely normal. I must have had loads and loads of dips and flows through my entire process. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Now, whilst we just finish off the remaining questions, I'm just going to pop up the slide which will basically inform you in no uncertain terms when our next webinars are, which will all be hosted by Hamza. Um, so please scan the QR code to sign up. I'll leave this on screen whilst we answer our penultimate question, and then I've got a couple more for you to have a look at, which will lead us up to 7 o'clock when we will bid all each other farewell. So this next question is If I graduate from high school in summer 2027, so 2 years from now, how many times would you recommend I sit the UCAT? Should I take it more than once just for practice?
So would that mean that you're gonna graduating from high school, i.e. 82 in summer 2027, I'm assuming. So that
I would
means
think so. So 26 tests, I'd think.
26th test, and then would you take a UCAT this year? Um, I don't think so. I think you'll do loads of mocks anyway, kind of in the preceding kind of part, where you kind of get familiar with the test, and when you start your practice, kind of next sort of March, April, May, kind of coming into June, and when you start your focused practice, you'll do loads and loads of mocks, and so you'll have loads and loads of practice of doing things under test conditions. Um, I think if you do choose to sit it this summer, I possibly could, create a sense of panic a little bit. If especially if you go into it without as much kind of practice as you would do for next year's test, um, which might be more stressful, then I think I would recommend. I don't think it's a necessary thing to do. I personally wouldn't have taken I didn't take the UCAT the year before for practice or anything. I sat it once, kind of to do it. And I think also, if you know that it's a practice UCAT, you might go into it with a very different mindset to the one that you might view as your real UCAT. So potentially, it might do you more of a hindrance than potentially a benefit there. That's my thought. But actually, I wouldn't know because I didn't go.
There we go. Now, before we answer our final question, we've got a couple more slides. So we want to give you guys an opportunity to, you know, win something, basically. You've got to be in it to win it. So if you fill out this feedback form, you might be in the chance of winning a one-to-one career coaching session. So I'll leave that up on screen whilst we focus on our final question, which is, what's your advice for preparing for 2026? Do a course this year, 2025, at the start of preparation, or do some question bank this year and a course next summer nearer to exam time.
I think it very much depends. I think I think if you're doing a course this year, you're going to aim to, at least in the background, continue your practice through the year. Because I think doing a course and then not practicing for a prolonged period of time, the risk of just forgetting kind of the things that you're kind of taught or the practice things that you're taught, um, can be quite high risk. I would say the earlier you do kind of technique is actually quite a good thing. So focusing on technique at an early point, can kind of help you quite a lot. And that can be from a course. It can be from doing kind of getting an understanding of what the core skills of every section are. So what we've already said, verbal reasoning, speed reading, getting practiced with that, QR, mental arithmetic, doing as much mental maths, kind of just getting your skills up to scratch. Um, Decision making, trying to do as many logical quizzes and puzzles as you possibly can. Um, a course will also help with that, and it will help you get those skills honed in before you start your question bank. And I think the earlier you do kind of those kind of techniques and skills building exercises, the better it would be for you. At the same time, doing the course this year at the start of preparation and then not doing questions through the year potentially is a risk. So I think if you are planning to do a course or any technique over the course of this summer, commit to at least a little bit of practice through the course of the year, because then that will keep that all fresh in your mind and have you ready for testing.
Fantastic. There we go. And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. Great advice. I couldn't agree more. Now, on that, I'd just like to give a big round of applause to our host, Hamza, who, as I said, will be here for the next 3 webinars. So if we could all give a massive thanks via the Zoom chat, that'd be fantastic. We've got some clapping emojis coming in. Fantastic, Chatana. Um, and don't forget to scan the QR code to get 50% off your first one-to-one UCAT lesson. So scan below, and we will see you. Let me just get that slide back up on the 9th of July for part two. But I wish you all a lovely rest of your Wednesday and see you all very, very soon. Awesome. Over and out. What I mate.
Sorted.
Good stuff.
Yeah.
Thought that went well. Few spelling mistakes on the slides. I'll check those for next time. I don't think it was your fault, but my bad. Um, but no, really good. Good advice. And to be honest, everybody stayed right until the end.
I think it's the most important thing.
So
So
I think that's really good. So we had sort of 20 throughout. A lot of ridiculously early preparers. Um, some sounds as if they're like only 15.
yeah,
Um,
it's
but
common.
have
Very
you got
rare.
anything planned this evening?
No, 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 just chilling. I've got to cook and then kind of get ready. I'm off tomorrow and Friday though, so kind of got teaching booked in tomorrow and then a day off on Friday, which will be quite good.
Awesome. Well, I'll let you go.
Cool.
And I might see you at the next one, or it might be Emma,
Yeah,
TBC. But all
perfect.
the best. Well done, mate. Cheers.
Bye.